remain the most optimistic person in this town, but we've got some serious differences.
But we have some fascinating insight as well from our new NBC News Wall Street Journal poll asking what you think about the fiscal cliff. And most of you want compromise. 70% of Democrats say the leaders involved should work together. 59% of Republicans, far fewer say both sides should dig in and stick to their guns. Just 25% of Democrats and 37% of Republicans. But this is where the country is split. 48% are optimistic that we will get a deal. Exactly the same number are not so confident. I want to bring in Chris Frates, congressional correspondent for the National Journal, and Ruth Marcus is a columnist for the Washington Post. Good Thursday to both of you. And Ruth, we'll start with you. You know, if you're a member of Congress right now or the president looking at this poll.
Please don't do that to me.
Oh, just for a moment, Ruth. Go with me.
Okay.
Do you say this? Do you say we need to get this done and compromise is more important than getting everything you want when you look at these numbers on the screen right now?
If I'm a member of Congress or the president, I say that. Am I confident that they will? Probably not, because your poll is fascinating because the voters are so much more, so much smarter than the politicians. They're both right about the unlikelihood of compromise and right about the need for it. But the parties on both sides are also dealing with some pressures from their base voters and the need to not look like they were the ones who were giving in first. And so I'm a believer with the speaker about the capacity of Washington to pull rabbits out of hats or presents out of stockings, but you can't feel too optimistic right now.
If you're a member of Congress, you're not going to listen to your base, I guess is what you're saying there. Ruth, thank you for that. And your approval rating is good still with us. Don't worry about that.
Thank you very much.
Chris, to you, if you look at the president's approval rating, speaking of which, it's at 53%, higher than any time during the campaign. And more people trust him to handle the fiscal cliff negotiations than Speaker Boehner, according to the poll. Is that why you think the president feels like he's going to win, at least when we're talking about taxes?
Well, there's a couple of reasons the president thinks he can win. One is approval rating, as you point out, is very high. Two, taxes go up either way. Whether the Republicans want to cut a deal with him and raise taxes just on the rich, or whether they won't go along with a deal on January 1st, we'll see taxes rise on everybody. So there's a feeling among Democrats that they're going to win and get what they want either way. This has really frustrated Republicans. When I talk to Republicans privately, they say that it's just a huge level of frustration with the White House right now. The Speaker has shown some flexibility on revenues. He's put $800 billion on the table and has privately said that he would even go higher than that if the president would come along on spending cuts.
How high are you hearing?
Well, it's unclear. I think he's just signaling a willingness, which many Republicans tell me, will also end up being a move on the tax rates. But he can't go there with his caucus unless he has the spending cuts that he can sell and say, look, there's $800 billion in revenue and we're going to get $800 billion in spending cuts. Right now, they're very far apart on that. Democrats don't feel like they have to move. They feel like they're in a catbird seat. And they'll tell you when we lost the majority in the House in 2010, we had to make $1 trillion in spending cuts. Now, Republicans need to go along with our tax increases.
And what we're hearing right now is, at least from Politico today, is that John Boehner says he's more open to more revenue. But that's if the White House, as you were saying, gets specific on entitlement cuts. So the question here, Ruth, what are the chances of what Chris was just saying happening?
That we go over the cliff, or that we find a middle ground on taxes. There are so many middle grounds to be found. You can find the middle ground on rates. You can find the middle ground on revenue numbers. If you look between 800 billion and 1.6, you get to 1.2. You could raise rates on some. You could raise rates partly to the 39.6%. But both sides have been unwilling to kind of take that first step, and that's the standoff we are. And to some of Chris's explanations of why the Democrats are in a different position, I would just add two quickly. Yeah. One is the election just happened, and the second is unlike the debt ceiling negotiations, this is a risk that they feel like they can take. The president was clear during the debt ceiling negotiations that he couldn't bet the country's economic health on it. This one, he's more willing to do it, but let's be serious. Whether you go over the cliff for a short time or for a longer time, the longer this goes on, the less healthy it is. Democrats and the president, as much as Republicans, want to enjoy the prospect, which they have in front of them, of a recovering economy, and this is not good for that. Therefore, it really does behoove both sides to figure out a good outcome that voters will like also. It's just a question of getting there and getting there with the clock ticking.
Ruth, Chris, stand by. I want to bring in Congresswoman Jackie Speier, a Democrat from California, from my hometown. And good morning to you, Congresswoman Speier.
Good morning, Richard.
Let's talk about both sides and whether they will come together. This is from our poll. 70% of Democrats and 59% of Republicans want you to compromise to make a deal. Are you willing to compromise despite what Ruth was just saying, that we could just go over that cliff?
You bet I'm willing to compromise. We have an absolute responsibility to the American people and frankly to the globe, because this is going to be a huge crisis economically for the world if we go over this fiscal cliff. You know, it was Ben Bernanke who first coined the term, and he was talking about the economy going over a cliff if we did not act appropriately. So we absolutely have to do the right thing here. Now, having said that, to juxtapose Medicare and Social Security, which are programs in which people pay into all their lives, as being the area that we are going to cut, is not where I believe the cut should be taking place.
Well, Representative, on that note, according to Politico, the article we were talking about earlier, John Boehner saying he is willing to move on revenue if Democrats cut entitlements. You may have heard me say that. If John Boehner says okay about a deal, will you exchange a tax hike for the rich for raising the age on Medicare, as you were just alluding to, that issue of Medicare?
That's the one area that doesn't make any sense. I mean, why should we do something that's stupid? Raising the retirement age from 65 to 67 actually only nets $2 billion. And the other costs associated with it is, maybe it's closer to $5 billion, but the other costs associated with it in terms of having to subsidize Medicaid and the states take us into $11 billion in costs. So that doesn't make any sense. We can look at other ways of making Medicare work smartly. And one of the things we have to do is get rid of the fee-for-service concept. Fee-for-service is so old school. We are now in an environment where managed care has proven to be very successful. In California, as you know, 80% of Californians are in a managed care system.
Representative, aside from that, what else would you be willing to put on the table then that Republicans are asking for right now?
Well, I think we should look at the entire federal budget and look at ways in which we can cut areas of discretionary spending. I mean, no one's talking about defense, and yet that is a plump budget. I mean, we just found out from the Air Force that they scuttled one of their programs because it was not going to work, and it was already $1 billion that we had spent on a computer system. So there's lots of areas that we can look at, and I'm willing to do that. All
right, I want to look at another poll number that just came out from the NBC News Wall Street Journal. It shows that 56%, if we go over the cliff, will blame both Democrats and Republicans equally. And when you look at those numbers here right now, what would you say to a constituent who calls you and asks why you can't work together right now, when you see some of these realities here from our poll?
Well, you're right. I mean, I think in the end, if we don't fix this, that we're all going to be nailed. And I think we come here with the responsibility to find ways to compromise. And there are ways to compromise within the Medicare system without doing stupid things. And I think raising the retirement age is just stupid.
All right. Thank you so much today, Congresswoman Jackie Speier of California, for your time today. All right, back to you, Chris. You know, speaking of blame, we're just talking about that with the representative there. And who is to blame if they don't get the deal done here? You know, the poll also overwhelmingly showing that people don't have a great feeling about the coming year. The numbers reading that 69% think that 2013 going to be a period of division. And, you know, that really doesn't bode well, certainly, right here, Chris? But are they right?
Well, I think voters do understand that both sides will be to blame, and you're starting to hear that a little bit more from Democrats. You know, I talked to Max Baucus, the Senate Finance Chairman, yesterday, and he said, I think people will blame all of us if we don't get it done. And what was interesting about what the Congresswoman just said is she called the kinds of reforms that have been out there on the table to the entitlement programs, the Medicare and Medicaid. She said they were stupid, that they shouldn't be done. And that's a very different place than where Republicans are, because while the Congresswoman talked about discretionary spending, it's important to remember that the entitlement spending on Social Security and Medicare are what are driving the budget and what is really folks are trying to get under control.
Yeah,
so I think it'll be everyone's fault if they go over the cliff.
At the microphones, we are hearing the very similar language from last week, this week. If you're watching, you got to be wondering, are they really making any progress? Ruth, to you on this one, Ben Bernanke was brought up in the conversation. He was also pretty pessimistic yesterday as well. Listen to what he said.
It's already affecting business investment and hiring decisions by creating uncertainty or creating pessimism. Clearly, this is a major risk factor and a major source of uncertainty about the economy going forward.
All right, the Fed chair making his final warning to Washington. Give us your best odds here.
The odds are low, and I have to say, when I hear people like the Congresswoman talking first about the need for compromise and then absolutely ruling out as stupid something that President Obama himself had put on the table in his talks with the Speaker, it really does make me despair and want to tear my hair out. The actual number for the savings from raising the Medicare entitlement age over 10 years, phasing it in slowly, the Congressional Budget Office says is something like $115 billion over 10 years, and that's the phased in over time. The second 10 years would be way more than that. It's a complicated thing. You need to look at it in a way that shields people who don't make as much money, but people like me who are going to be working I hope till way past 65, don't need to rely on Medicare. And the intransigence, I have to say, on both sides here, on tax rates from Republicans, on entitlements from Democrats, is really just enough to make you want to not have a good holiday season.
As you were saying, yeah. You've already pulled your hair out twice today, Ruth.
Exactly. And I have enough left.
There you go. All right, Ruth Marcus, thank you so much. Chris Frates as well.
Thanks.
You both have a great day.
Thank you.
Secretary of State Hillary Clinton will testify